Hello, BookTube, and welcome to Poetry Thursday, little BookTube tradition where a few BookTubers talk about poetry on Thursday for some unknown reason to an audience of perhaps 10 people. And I am engaging in Poetry Thursday, but I'm not picking at random. Or I would be reading you one Robert Service poem after another. Instead, I am going through this book, 20th Century American Poetry, poet by poet with almost no exceptions. I'm just starting at the beginning and moving forward. In a way, it's an attempt to challenge my own comfort zone because 20th century poetry is where poetry as a viable genre that people actually buy and read went to die. And I know that already. I watched it happen. So, going through this book, when I would ordinarily, usually in a used bookstore, I would see that title and I would think, no, thank you. But instead, thanks to BookTube, we are going through this whole thing as we approach 0 Hour, as we approach 1959. But we're not there yet. Instead, we're dealing with a few of the vagaries that you will get in any poetry anthology, especially one with more than one editor. This has 3 editors. Some editors will pick favorites of theirs. Some editors will pick old mentors of theirs or thesis advisors of theirs. Some editors will have a bugaboo about how the poetic tradition has ignored so-and-so or such and such, and they really deserve to be on the table of contents. And I guess that makes sense. Actually, in a way, although it's a little irritating to feel like I'm having my time wasted, in a way, it's the most valuable thing about an anthology, because it will introduce you to byways and lesser-known paths that you might not have encountered otherwise. I hate to be uncharitable, but I think we are dealing with that today. We're dealing with a poet called Josephine Miles today, who's in here. I think our editors give her 3 poems. Yeah, 4 poems. They give her 4 poems in here. I don't know what the reason is. I mean, this anthology came out before the alt-left seized all of publishing and all of academia. So when this anthology came out, there was not the equivalency czar who has authority from the owner of the publishing house to fire anyone, including senior editors, sitting there actually counting on the table of contents and going to Facebook to find out the sex of each person. It has to be 55, 45. It has to be that. It has to be 55 women, 45 men at least. You want it to be 95 women, go right ahead, but we have to go and count. It doesn't matter at all about the content or the quality. It matters only that the count is even. You see that in literary prizes, right? Look at the long list of any literary prize. It's exactly 50% male and female, and it wouldn't be if you were judging by the quality of the books. What are the odds? But anyway, that's a rant for another day. I don't know why Josephine Miles is in here, but we're going to read a couple of her poems, which are fairly good. And the qualification that I want to make there is going to sound a little bit mean-spirited, which is that almost anybody can write a fairly good poem. Once or twice. I, once upon a time, 35 years ago, wrote a fairly good poem. It's when the fire consumes you and you work on it for weeks and weeks at a time, it's not hard to raise a poem above the level of doggerel, especially if the rules don't apply, especially if you don't have to worry about scansion or rhyme or meter or anything like that. Again, I'm not meaning to drag Josephine Miles through the mud. We'll read 2 of her poems. You might like them. They're both from the 1970s, I think. Yeah, they are. They're both from the 1970s, and this author, I think, died in 1985. So these are born in 1911. 1970s would be you're touching on the door of old age there. We'll read a couple of these. You might like them. You might hunt out a Josephine Miles collection. That would be great. And I mean, I should check myself by observing the obvious, which is that from here on out, I am mostly going to be wondering what this person is doing, not only in this anthology, but in any poetry anthology. That's mostly going to be the theme, so I can't single her out. So first we'll do Conception from 1974. Death did not come to my mother like an old friend. She was a mother, and she must conceive him. Up and down the bed she fought, crying, "Help me!" But death was a slow child, heavy. He waited. When he was born, we took and tired him. Now he is ready to do his good in the world. He has my mother's features. He can go among strangers to save lives. And you notice that is just randomly broken up into the form of verse. It doesn't have any reason to be verse. The lines don't have any reason to be what they are or where they are, and no reason to look the way they do. But the basic idea that the narrator's mother was such a maternal figure that she had to give birth to death, and that it was slow and it worked hard in her world, on her bed, her deathbed, we assume. And then once death is born, I guess meaning once the narrator's mother dies, death goes out into the world to go among strangers and save lives, which death by definition does not do. So the poem, I think, wheels a little into the incomprehensibility that is going to become hand in hand with this do whatever you want on the page. That incomprehensibility is going to go hand in hand with that freeform nonsense to completely characterize 20th century American poetry. So I think it runs off the rails just a bit at the end, but it's a neat image that a mother would struggle to conceive, to bring forth death rather than just greet it as a stranger. And then we'll move on to a poem from a few years later, 1979. This is Album. This is a hard life you are living while you are young, my father said, as I scratched my casted knees with a paper knife. By law of compensation, your old age should be grand. Not grand, but a terrible compensation to perceive past the energy of survival in its sadness, the hard life of the young. Okay. So that is intricate. It again has no reason to be stacked as a poem, none whatsoever. It gets intricate. Is it needlessly intricate? And also a totally passé question that people don't ask about poetry or fiction or anything anymore. Is it true? It starts off with the narrator of the poem remembering a line said to the narrator by the narrator's father about a hard life you're living because the child had a knee in a cast. We can presume from that the father was being sarcastic, gently, affectionately sarcastic. What a hard life you have. You have a knee in a cast. You play all day long, but you have a knee in a cast. Maybe this means, again, we can perceive the father sarcastically saying, gently saying, maybe this means you'll have an easy old age. Then there's a gap. See, there's a gap between what I guess we could call stanzas. This is just 4 sentences of prose. But there's a gap, and then the narrator is talking about their old age. Not grand. The father was sarcastically saying, well, if you're having such a rough childhood, maybe you'll have a grand old age. And now, after this stanza break, the narrator is old and is saying, not grand, but of a terrible compensation, to perceive past the energy of survival in its sadness, the hard life of the young. Meaning that the narrator has lost the sense of gentle sarcasm that the father made the original comment about, because it is not actually a hardship for a kid to have a cast on their knee. The father was correct in being gently sarcastic, but the narrator is lost in the self-regard, the navel-gazing, and the self-pity that are the 3 hallmarks of 20th century American poetry, and is saying, well, my old age isn't grand, but at least now I can look back with a clear eye on the hardships of youth, because it really was hard for me to have my knees in a cast. And to hell with my father, I guess. So this is called Album, but it really ought to be called To Hell with My Father, like all the rest of the poetry in this anthology. All the poems that follow in this anthology will have different titles, and they'll be evocative, but most of them could accurately be titled To Hell with My Father. So there you go. There's Josephine Miles. I'm afraid it doesn't get any better next week. A little bugaboo of mine, and also another little caution as we slide into the modern era of 20th century American poetry, is that sometimes it hasn't really been that much of an issue so far, Ironically, the one time when it was an issue, only one of you guessed correctly, and it was a harbinger of doom. But it's just going to be possible in the pages that follow here that I will know or have had contact with the poet in question. That's not going to help any. It's already going to be a car crash. That's not going to help any. But we're going to go on. I am committed to this book for the rest of the year. So we'll come back to Poetry Thursday next week. Thank you, BookTube.